Have you ever watched a movie? I love Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Watching it was a canon event for me. I think Luca is great on the first watch, and upon rewatch it lands somewhere between good and fine. Raya and the Last Dragon is a movie with great potential and terrible execution. I didn't enjoy all of these movies, but the one thing I did enjoy about all three of them was the discussions around them. When Luca first came out, a lot of people related to its themes and story, saying that it was a PG version of Call Me By Your Name. I mean, the story is basically about this little boy who makes friends with this other boy, but then the family doesn't approve of them, so they try to send Luca to this dark, deep place. So then they run away to a little town where if their true identities are found out, they're gonna die. Then they are outed anyways, but then their friends accept them, and then a lesbian couple comes out in the rain. Luca's story really felt like the average gay kid's experience, and people called it as such. Raya and the Last Dragon had practically nothing going for it except for the sexual tension and gay banter between Raya and the girl with the cool girl in a video game made for a modern audience haircut. And when Across the Spider-Verse came out, some people started saying that Spider-Gwen has a trans identity. A lot of people responded to these readings as nonsensical, and a lot of people started asking the authors and actors of their intentions, demanding to know whether the writers intended for Luca and Alberto or Raya and Naomi to be gay. I don't know about the other characters, but I know that in the case of Luca, either the writer or the director actually responded and said that, haha, no, we actually didn't write them to be gay. Immediately, that was a stamp of approval for one side of the argument. The author said that they're not gay, so if you have a queer reading of the story, you're obviously factually wrong, right? Also, you may have noticed that all of my examples are of queer readings of these characters and stories, and that's because I think when it's specifically a queer take on a story, the reactions and responses to it tend to be a lot more charged. When it comes to these topics, the discussion unfortunately tends to be a lot more overblown, which is why I use these as examples, but that doesn't mean that what I'm about to say doesn't also apply to any other type of reading of a story. I think the whole idea of canon and the importance of whether the author actually intended something or not became really popularized by Marvel movies, and I'm not trying to say that this is an issue that Marvel created, because that's not the case. The whole "the author is dead" argument existed long before Marvel, or even before it was given a name. I just think the approach the studio has towards releasing its movies has been a catalyst in why this type of thinking has become so popular, but I don't think that's the only reason for it. First of all, we need to establish this isn't real, none of this is real, canon is not a real thing. These are just words on a paper read out loud by actors, and as cute as all the theories are about why in Spider-Verse people glitch when they go to another dimension, but in a movie like No Way Home they don't have that issue, the main reason is that these are separate movies made by separate people who didn't necessarily communicate about the rules of their movies when they were making them. The reason why Wanda goes through a whole arc in WandaVision but in Multiverse of Madness is absolutely undone is because two different teams were working on these movies in a short time and they didn't really get to communicate and plan out Wanda's arc properly. Does the author's intent matter? To a certain degree, yes. I mean, the entire reason a piece of writing is considered worth analyzing is because it was created with intention. We only try to make meaning out of something if we know that there was meaning put into it. If Hosier's Take Me to Church wasn't written by a human being and it was instead made because a monkey started pressing buttons on a keyboard at random and it just happened to write Take Me to Church, there wouldn't really be anything considered worth analyzing in it. You wouldn't be wondering what is meant by fine-looking high horse or something, because you'd know that there was no intention put behind it. There wouldn't be any greater philosophical meaning behind it because it was just a monkey pressing buttons on a keyboard. This is also why there's no reason to analyze a writing made by an AI, because there was really no intention behind putting those words in that sequence. It just did it. But I do think that you can have a wrong reading of a story. You can still completely misinterpret an author's intention. Here's an example. Tangled is one of my favorite Disney movies, and I think there are a lot of ways for a person to relate to the whole feeling of being locked up in a tower and really wanting to go explore the world outside of that tower, but the only source that you have keeps telling you that the world outside is really dangerous and abusive, so you should just stay put. Someone could say this whole being stuck in a tower and then finding someone who gives you the courage to leave it, leading you to leave behind the abusive family and finding your true loving family, might remind them of their coming out story. To someone else, it might remind them of moving out of a town they grew up in. But I think if someone looks at the story and their takeaway from it is that the movie is glamorizing abuse and gaslighting through Mother Gothel, I think that's just completely misunderstanding the story and the intentions behind the existence of Mother Gothel's character. But the fact that some theories or readings are kinda shit doesn't mean that there is one specific theory theory you're reading that is the correct one. It just means that there are different degrees to how meaningful every reading is. And there are so many different ways of looking at a story because all communication is collaborative. Imagine I'm trying to describe the tree in our front yard to you. It's a relatively small tree and a kid can easily climb it. We prune it at least once a year to make sure its branches don't reach the height of the front gate. Most of its leaves are dark green, but some of them are red and orange and brown. The green leaves are smooth and waxy, but as they change color, they get dry and brittle. Wait, I could have just described this instead of a tree. Anyways, I can't telepathically airdrop the experience of this tree into your head, which is why I have to use language. I break down the experience into its elements like colors and textures, and using the words I find suitable for describing those elements, I tell you about the tree. Then you take those words and translate them into your own sensations and try to recreate your own version of my tree in your head. But you and I have different lived experiences, which means the lived experience that you associate with the words and descriptions that I use are not going to be identical to mine. So the tree in your head is going to be different than the tree in my head. And you can't telepathically airdrop your tree into my head either. So even though we know the trees are different, we don't exactly know how they're different. So the thing in your head is kinda yours and it's kinda ours. I supply the blueprint, you supply the material. So all communication is collaborative. Even when I'm the only one speaking, we make meaning together. In which case, how much does the other even matter? Like if David Chase randomly decided to come out and say that Tony dies at the end of Sopranos, or Luca's director says they didn't write the characters as gay, or if J.K. Rowling tweets whatever the fuck she tweets about Dumbledore's dick, what are we supposed to do with that information? If that information was important to the story, you probably should have included it in the story. So when we say what a story means to you isn't up to anyone else, in a lot of ways that includes the author. Also, these aren't real people, these are stories. These are fictional people and events meant to represent real things. Now, depending on your interpretation of the beginner's guide, you might disagree with my next statement, but since these are not real people, even if some people ignore parts of the story, because these aren't real people. Even if some people ignore parts of the text in order to fit it into whatever theory or type of reading they have, it doesn't really matter. Shipping Sokka and Zuko and making fan art and fanfiction about them really isn't the same as shipping, I don't know, Taylor Swift and Harry Styles. Plus, canon is overrated. The only reason Miraculous Ladybug has survived as long as it has despite its writer's best efforts is the fan-made content. Argue with the wall. I think as a fan of something, you're allowed to explain whatever's left unexplained with whatever theory you want, and you're free to ignore whatever information you want in order to theorize your theory. That might mean that your theory is gonna be kinda shit or maybe not as sound, but you are still entitled to it. For an example, my theory is that the Toy Story franchise is good, and for that theory to work, I ignore that the fourth film exists. My camera randomly stopped recording, but I was going to say, adding and ignoring information is how a lot of really fun analysis and readings of stories happen anyways. I mean, half the love for Encanto was because people just decided that the movie talks about the intergenerational trauma caused by colonialism and ignored that we don't talk about Bruno's bridge despite its catchiness doesn't really make sense. We also ignored all the TikTok dances that happen in the middle of Under the Surface. Also, on another note, representation is important, but at the same time, if you're letting something made up, like a made-up character's gender or sexuality or race, stop you from relating to their story or understanding why somebody else really relates to their story, you're probably just depriving yourself of enjoyment. Also, if the sentence Gwen Stacy has a trans identity sparked a little question mark in your brain, you can watch this video by Council of Geeks. It's a really good video, I really enjoyed it. I'm also gonna put the links to a lot of other videos related to this topic that I enjoyed in the description, so check those out too. And yeah, that's it. Bye.